بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم علمنا اللهم ربي يسر ولا تؤثر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح ويا فتاح يا عليم يا فتاح. Okay, according to the Saturday, inshallah, next session we make sure that things are on time. Also, I'd like to apologize for my voice. I've not been well for the past couple of days. I've been down with the flu, but I decided that inshallah, through this lesson, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be sure. Hadith lesson, we talk about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have to talk about his right now. So, without further ado, let's begin today's lesson by talking about some preliminary discussions. So you can see on the board, we have a title of what we are going to be doing. I will explain inshallah in plenty of detail what it is that we will be studying. So in short, this lesson is a lesson of Hadith, and we will go through a particular text of Hadith known as the Nawawi or Imam Nawawi for the Hadith. I will explain all of this inshallah in a moment. So for today's introduction, what I wanted to do is discuss, as you can see on the board, we will discuss what is a Hadith. And since Hadith is often seen as synonymous with the Sunnah, we will explore what both of these mean, so we are clear as to what we are studying in the text. Then we will ask a certain question, or we will look into writing Hadith. As you know, this book, Imam Nawawi's Arba'in, the 40 is a written book. We will be looking at who were the first individuals who decided to write down the Hadith. And we look at this genre known as the 40 Hadith. Who were the first individuals who selected 40 Hadith? Part of this is a polemic, is an argument, which you may or may not have heard of amongst the laity, amongst the lay people. There is a lazy criticism that Hadith comes 300 years after the Prophet. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah was born in the 3rd century, so there is this understanding that Hadith prior to Imam Bukhari did not exist, and therefore there is plenty of room of skepticism, there is plenty of room of doubt. You may or may not have heard of this. In many cases it's important to address this, along with a couple of other considerations. Hopefully all of this will become clear by the end of today's lesson. Then we look at this book itself, we situate it, we look at how Imam Nawawi came about writing this book, we look at its significance, and the author will meet for next lesson. We will discuss the author next lesson when you have your hand, your booklet figured out inshallah. So without further ado, let's begin by asking a question. And this question involves all of you. This question involves all of you, since terms that we will come across on a daily basis. We use them in our parlance, in our conversation, and I often tend to call these Muslim words. Muslim words. By that, what do I mean? You know, we tend to substitute a lot of our vocabulary with Islamic vocabulary. So, for example, we will say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you hidayah. The question is, what does hidayah mean? What is the definition of hidayah? And then the opposite of hidayah is dalala. The Quran uses dalala. But the question is, what does dalala mean? Yeah. Is there anyone in this room who hasn't used the word hidayah, or who hasn't come across it, someone using it? And if there isn't, then the question I want to ask you is, what does hidayah mean? What do we understand by hidayah? What do we understand by hidayah? What does hidayah mean? Anyone want to contribute to this conversation, to this discussion?
Guidance?
Guidance. Hawas, right? Hidayah means guidance. Is there anything else that Hidayah means? And how would we define guidance? So look, I'll explain it to you, it's not a problem, but this is the thing I mean now. What I'm saying is we tend to use vocabulary on a daily basis, but it requires us to be clear with what these words stand for, lest we misuse them. Okay, so Hidayah in the Arabic language means to show someone, to guide someone. Yeah, it's defined as ad-dalalatu ala tariq. Dalalatu ala tariq means to show someone the way. Show someone the way. Right? This is what it means literally. But technically speaking, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses hidayah in two meanings. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hud, وَأَمَّا ثَمُودُ فَهَدَيْنَاهُمْ فَاسْتَحَبُّوا الْعَمَى عَلَى الْهُدَى. That insofar as Qawm Thamud are concerned, we showed them the way, we showed them what's right and wrong. فَاسْتَحَبُّوا الْعَمَى عَلَى الْهُدَى. But they preferred blindness over guidance. Look, I will explain this, I will translate this one more time. The people of Thamud, we guided them, hadaynahum, we gave them hidayah, but they preferred blindness over guidance. So this is one meaning of hidayah. This is one connotation of hidayah. It's to show someone the way. So for example, if I want to go to the north of England, I will take the M6. Right? From here you catch maybe the M40, and the M40 to the M6, you're there. This is this meaning of hidayah. To tell someone the way. Okay, you want to go to, for example, central London, you tell someone, you go from here, take this bus number, you go to, what's the train station over here, and then from the train station, you'll go to central. Right? This is one meaning of hidayah. The second meaning of hidayah, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran, is not merely to show someone the way, which is the directions, but to take them, to assist them. To assist them. So instead of me just telling you that, okay, you want to go central, the way to go central is you catch this bus number, you go to this train station, and from there I will come with you. I will say, you want to go? Come. Take my hand, we will go together. This is the second meaning of hidayah. So, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says then in the Quran, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, what meaning of hidayah do you think is being referred to over here? The one where we're just being showed right for wrong, or where we are being shown right for wrong, but also we are being assisted? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is assisting us. He's giving us, the word is tawfiq. Tawfiq, He's giving us the assistance. What meaning do you think applies over here? In this verse that we read 5 times a day and more, in every rak'ah of prayer? Taking by the hand. Hence, the Prophet ﷺ made dua, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan wa arina al-batila batilan. But he didn't stop there. He said, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'a. Allah show us right for right, and then grant us its practice. Allow us to follow it. Wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinaba. And allow us to see wrong for wrong, and assist us in refraining from it. You see, both meanings of hidayah are beautifully summarized in this one dua. Both meanings of hidayah. So one hidayah is to tell someone the way, the other one is to take them by the hand and to assist them. Are we clear with what hidayah means now? So if somebody ever asks you what does hidayah mean, are we clear with what this means? We're clear with, like this, what I'm saying is there's a lot of vocabulary that we use on a daily basis, which requires at least some clarification, yeah, some consolidation, so we're clear with what we're talking about. Otherwise, what happens when we discuss? You have something else in your mind, I have something else in my mind, using the same words, and we are what? We are comparing apples with pears. Yeah, are we aware of false words? You know what false words are? False words are basically words that are shared between languages but have different meanings. Different meanings. So an example of this would be maybe a library. A library in English is what? A place where you can find books. A library in French is where you would buy a book. It's a bookshop, not a place where you go and pick up books. That's a bibliothèque where you're going to look for like this. So you have vocabulary, shared vocabulary in languages which have different meanings. Are we clear with this? So I'll give you a nice one. So in Urdu, we use the term buzurg or buzurg. What does buzurg mean? A pious, an elder, somebody who's a wali, who's a friend of Allah, a very old man, who's a saint, Right? One of my friends, he went to Hajj, and in Hajj you go to stone the shaitan, right? And there are three shaitan. There's the small one, the middle one, and the largest one. So the largest one is written Shaitan-e-Buzurg. Shaitan-e-Buzurg. Now Buzurg in Persian just means the big one. So Shaitan-e-Buzurg means what? The pious shaitan. No, it means the biggest one. So this is what I'm saying. These are loan words. Words that are shared between languages, but we confuse ourselves that what does this mean like that, right? So look, going back to the topic then, and to make good progress, we have two words that we commonly use, and often we use them as synonyms. We have something called the hadith, and we have something called the sunnah. Something called the hadith, something called the sunnah, and we will investigate this inshallah, and by the end of this lesson we'll be clear what this means. So what I've given you are two pictures that will perhaps help differentiate between these two nouns. Actually, I think a point worth mentioning is, in Arabic, the concept of a thesaurus is somewhat non-existent. Right? Arab scholars have debated at long whether we have something called a thesaurus. We are aware of a thesaurus, right? When you want to write, for example, at GCSE, you have to write an essay. What do? You pick up a thesaurus. It's the opposite of a dictionary, where it gives you synonyms, or similar words, and you use them. Right? Amongst Arabs, or amongst at least the lexicographers of the Arabic language, they argue that a thesaurus does not exist. What we have are differences and similar words. So words that are similar, but all of them are different. So if we can accept this, and there's no reason not to accept it, we have to ask ourselves then, what is the difference between a hadith and a sunnah, even though we use them synonymously? This is the basic premise. Do we understand the ishkal? Do we understand the objective over here? Hadith and sunnah, we use them interchangeably in our daily language. But as I have just explained, the idea of a thesaurus does not exist in Arabic. Therefore, there must be differences. Therefore, the root of both of these words must be different. The question is, what are the differences? And this is what we want to somewhat explore via this this slide, right? So, any ideas? Are there any takers who want to perhaps engage this question? What is a hadith? What is a sunnah? Anyone?
So, is a hadith a statement?
Allah, it's a statement, correct? Anyone want to anything else? If the hadith is a statement, then what is a sunnah? See? You can ask. There's no right and wrong. We're here. It's a classroom. You can make as many mistakes as you want. There's no sharm. Okay, don't feel offended. I'm not here. I'm not going to ridicule you. No, we're here to learn. There's no other reason why we're here. I'm not here to test you. Okay, feel free to make as many mistakes as you want. Right? The issue will come in when you make a mistake outside of the classroom. When Channel 4 comes along, for example, and you're being asked the question, and then you're going to say something, and everyone's going to be upset. Okay? So here's the place to ask these questions and to get it all wrong and to debate and everything. We're going to engage this, right? The more lively this classroom is, the better it is for me and for everyone else. Otherwise, as my teacher would say, I feel like I'm teaching to a graveyard. I will go teach and go home, right, and fall asleep, right? So what do we think?
Sunnah is we have to follow what Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
So look, the two things come up. One is following. Number two is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. Jazakumullah khairan, right? I'm going to add. Is there anything else that we can add? Is there anything else that we can add?
Is the sunnah an established practice?
An established practice. That's one way of looking at it. Yeah. Look, we'll get the right answer. So look, quickly then, hadith is a statement. Is a statement. So what's central to a hadith then is speech. Can you have a statement without saying anything? If I don't say it, then how are you going to know what I've said? Statement specifically, like central to this is you need to speak, right? So the Quran, for example, in the surah that I read, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. The Prophet ﷺ is being told that regarding Allah's graces and favors upon you, hadith, relate them, narrate them to others, right? So hadith is to narrate, to speak, to tell others, to convey it. This is the meaning of hadith. Yeah, the Quran uses it, فَبِأَيِّ حَدِيثٍ بَعْدَهُ يُؤْمِنُونَ. After all that the Quran has argued, will they not then believe? And if they don't believe, then what other speech will they believe? What are the arguments? So hadith is being used as a statement, as an argument. Clear? Are we clear with this? So hadith primarily is speech. Is speech. It's the said word that is being conveyed. Okay? And sunnah, as you can see from the picture, it's a practice, something that has been done, a trend. Nowadays we call it a trend. Yeah, something has happened, like there's a fashion that's come out and everyone's following it. So you will call it the sunnah of whatever personality that you want to talk about, right? So there's a trend. Let's say some footballer has shaved his head. Now every child wants to shave his head because it's the sunnah of this footballer. This is how you use it in the language. Okay, sunnah literally means a practice, but it's not done once, though, is it? A sunnah isn't done once. But if it's done once, there are people who are going to follow it. That's the key thing, right? The difference between any practice, anything that I've done, and a sunnah is that the sunnah is in practice. It is institutionalized. It is followed for time to come, right? For generations to come, they will follow it. Then this is, you know, when we say this is the way our forefathers have done it. This argument that we hear, this is the way our forefathers did it. This is sunnah, because we are holding on to it. Okay, and sunnah, by the way, is a neutral term. Is a neutral term. By that, sunnah can be both positive and negative linguistically in the language. So there's a hadith, for example, in Sahih Muslim, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man sanna fil Islami sunnatan hasanatan." That whoever was to set a good trend, or whoever was to institutionalize, Hasan means a good practice, فَلَهُ أَجْرُهَا وَأَجْرُ مَنْ عَمِلَ بِهَا. He will have the good deeds for that sunnah which he has institutionalized, and all those who follow that sunnah. And conversely, the Prophet ﷺ said, وَمَنْ سُنَّ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ سُنَّةً سَيِّئَةً. Sayyi' means sinful, abhorrent. So whoever was to set an abhorrent practice, whoever was to institutionalize a reprehensible sunnah, فَلَهُ وِزْرُهَا وَوِزْرُ مَنْ عَمِلَ بِهَا. He will have the burden of it, and he will also share the burden of all those who follow it. You see, the hadith is using sunnah in the linguistic sense. You can have a good sunnah, you can have a bad sunnah. You can have the sunnah to shaitan, you can have the sunnah to Rahman. It's a practice, it's a way of doing things. This much is sunnah. But in our language, when we say it's sunnah, what do we mean? Specifically, what do we mean? The Prophet ﷺ. However, since we are Hanafis over here, we also include the sunnah of the khulafa. Remember this. Sunnah is the way that was institutionalized by the Prophet ﷺ and also the khulafa al-Rashideen. Where do we get this from? From the hadith itself, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Alaykum bi sunnati." Hold on to my sunnah, wa sunnatil al-khulafa al-Rashideen al-Mahdiyeen ba'di. And hold on to the sunnah of the rightly guided khulafa who are to guide others. So khalifa in Arabic comes from khalaf, which is to succeed someone. Yeah, an heir or a successor. Someone passes away, the person who takes his place is a khalif. So hence Abu Bakr anhu was called Khalifatu Rasulillah. He is the successor of the Prophet ﷺ. You see, we'll look at this in more detail, right? So Khalif, Khulafa are those who succeed the Prophet ﷺ in his position as leader of the believers. Well, is that clear? So Sunnah includes not just the institutionalization of the Prophet ﷺ and his example, but also the acts and the deeds and the practices which the Khulafa al-Rashideen had also what? Institutionalized. There's not many, but there are some. And these, according to us, are binding. according to us, are binding. So an example of this would be in Jumu'ah, how many adhan does the muaddin give? One or two? Or two. See, this wasn't in the Prophet's time. And this was added by another Khalif later on, Khalif Uthman ibn Affan radhiyallahu ta'ala. So there are some practices like this. Is this clear? Huh?
So, this is a question on the sunnah and then customary practice.
Yes.
Where we have something that the Prophet ﷺ did, and that's an established practice, and we then class that as sunnah, then how do you differentiate between that and what was the practice of the people? So then people will say, as an example, that the Prophet ﷺ would eat a certain type of food. For us now, we say that's sunnah, that. But then people could also argue that that's customary to the Arab people of that time.
Yeah, so here what you're talking about is what's binding from the sunnah and what isn't. Yeah, so let's establish there's something called customary practice, something which the Prophet ﷺ did, right? Now what you're arguing over here is which of this is binding on the believer and which is not binding. This is a different topic. You see this? Like basically in our terms, what's wajib, what's not wajib. Yes, this is what you're saying, isn't it? The Prophet ﷺ used to eat in this way. Is it wajib for me to eat like this or not? This is another topic altogether. So the bindingness, the hukum shar'i, the legal ruling of each of the Prophet ﷺ examples, this is the remit of fiqh, and I will discuss this inshallah in a moment. Right.
I think following on from that, it's not just that is it binding or not, but is it something that was particular to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Let everybody, even maybe his enemies, do the same.
Not a problem. So I'm going to come to this in a moment. Yeah, this is one of the distinctions that the jurists themselves make. So something which the Prophet ﷺ did as a messenger and not as a human. This is the distinction that they make. Yeah. So did he do something in his position as what? As a Rasul, as a Nabi to his Ummah to guide them? This is most definitely binding. Something which he didn't do it for that purpose is nonetheless what? It's recommended if a person does it. If he doesn't do it, it's no problem. But if and the same goes for the khulafa. Not everything that the khulafa said is binding, but what they said in position of a khalif, this is binding. You see the difference? So, for example, when in Hazrat Umar's time, which is the age of conquest, the companions had reached as far as Transoxiana. They, maybe you can study this in your own, or maybe we can have a different conversation regarding the conquests in the prophets in the time of the Khulafa. So we know that the Hazrat Umar's reign is one of conquest, one of expansion. So some of the companions who were on what is now considered the frontier land, what was then the frontier land. So we're looking at Armenia, Georgia, parts of what is now Iran, and north is Uzbekistan. There were companions who were marrying the local women there. As Umar wrote to them that you should not marry them, you need to marry the Arab women, because who's going to marry your own womenkind? Yeah. So the commander there wrote back to him saying, is this your ruling as a Khalif, or is this your advice? He said, this is not a hukum, I'm not obligating this upon you, this is my own position, this is what I see. The companion said, Jazakumullah khairan, we're going to get married over here. Finish. Right? So they are able to what? They're even willing to ask and interrogate further whether this is binding upon them or not. He said it's not binding. He says, okay, that's fine. We have choice. Okay, so there is a distinction.
While we're discussing this, I think it's important to understand whether the scope of Sunnah is limited to Prophet Muhammad and the Khulafa Rashidin or other prophets as well. For example, when we do sacrifice, we say it's the Sunnah of Prophet Ibrahim.
Yes. So we will talk about this as well, inshallah, later on in the classroom. So somebody asked regarding the Sunnah of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. This is because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our Prophet particularly, claimed to come in the tradition of Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. What was known as Deen Hanif. Hanif is the term that is used, which is the term that the pagans of Makkah, to whom the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent, recognized as a pristine religion. It's a pure religion. The rest of the other things they had was adulterated. So idolatry was something they knew wasn't Abrahamic, so to speak. They knew that, what was his name? Luhay ibn Amr, or Amr ibn Luhay, was the one who bought idols from the north, from Syria. He bought them and he put them in the Kaaba, saying this is something good. I saw it in the north and I think we should practice this as well. So this is definitely the case. And we know this. Think about this. The Arabs post Amr ibn Luhay continued this practice of idolatry. The Kaaba, we are told, were full of how many idols? 365 idols, right? Every day they had a different idol. But think about this. The Maqam Ibrahim was always there. But the Maqam Ibrahim was never worshipped. We have no evidence that the Maqam Ibrahim was ever used for idolatry purposes. And part of that, our teachers would say, was the barakah of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. He was such a muwahid, he himself was so monotheist through and throughout, that throughout the ages of paganism and idolatry, no superstition was had with Maqam Ibrahim. Yeah. But also, as I was saying, is that the pagan Meccans themselves recognize that this is not from the practice of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. And therefore, it makes no sense to do anything to this. Wallahu alam. Right, so yes, we will talk about this. But in short then, what is it that I want to get at? Number one, Hadith is the spoken word of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Sunnah is the practice. What the Prophet ﷺ did. What the Prophet ﷺ did. And if you want a very technical Hanafi definition of the Sunnah, it's what the Prophet ﷺ did habitually and did not leave except once or twice for a very good reason. This is a strict Hanafi definition. What is it? Something which the Prophet ﷺ did habitually. He did it as a habit, as a custom, and he did not leave except once or twice for a very good reason. So what would this mean? If he never left it, that would make it wajib or fard in the Hanafi school. Something which the Prophet did consistently, and he urged others to do it, and he never left it himself for a reason, nor did he explain that this is not necessary. Alright, this would become fard or wajib. But if he left it for a good reason, for whatever reason, then this would mean that it's sunnah. Okay, and it's best to do it like that. This would be definition. Right? Why am I bringing this up? Why is this discussion important for what we are about to do? Look, here's the question. Hadith, we said, is the spoken word of the Prophet ﷺ. It's a snapshot, like taking a camera, but in words. In words. What have you done? You have recorded the Prophet's practice, whether that be via speech or in amal, via the written word. Is this clear? And sunnah is practice. It's practice. It's something that you do. Now think about this. The Prophet ﷺ said to the believers, you need to pray. Let's say there's a hukum that came down. Immediately, what came down? A ruling came down that we need to change the qibla. We need to change the qibla. Or you need to do X, Y, and Z. Do you think the companion said, hang on a second, I need to write this down first? Or did they just practice it straight away? Did they execute that command straight away, immediately? Or did they think, okay, we need to wait, I need to go home, pull out my books, my notepad, and I need to write this down, that on this date, on this time, Prophet said this. What do you think the companions did? Practice. So what we just recognize another form of preservation. Another form of preservation. So one form of preservation, I said, was writing it down. The Prophet said this, or he did this. The other form is practice. So look, let me reword this. Since the ruling of prayer has come down, salah has come down, has there been a moment in the history of Islam where people have forgotten what prayer looks like? They've stopped praying, and we've had a generation gap for 600 years. Then someone comes along saying, brothers, in our religion we had to pray salah. And then someone tries picking up some books from the library and he tries to reconstruct what prayer looked like. Is this happened in our history? What do you think? This has happened in other religions. Hence I'm making this statement. Right? That in our religion, the time from which the hukum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the ruling of prayer, Muslims have been praying since then, and they have been praying consecutively. There is an uninterrupted chain. From generation, yes, maybe in some areas where we had apostasy. So whether it's Spain or whether it's Far East Asia or something like this, but the Ummah as a whole, no chance. No chance. The Ummah as a whole has been praying. Let's take another pillar then. What about fasting? Has there been a time where generations have gone by and they don't know how to fast? Has this ever happened? As an entire ummah, we don't know how to fast. Then somebody comes along and finds like a book, like a Da Vinci Code, and is like, oh, this is what it meant, and you're going to now question entire faith. Has this happened? No, it's not happened. Hajj. Has there been a time where an entire like generation, maybe 1 year there was war, 1 year something happened, but I'm talking generations. It is not the case. So what we can say, what we can affirm then with certainty is that another mode of preservation is amal. And do not make this light. Do not make this light. Do not consider this light. This is a very important thing. That the ummah has been practicing, has been observing the law of God ever since what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the law. This is a miracle of sorts. Is this clear? Right. Why again coming back to this is because we know that in Islam laws have been amended. So for example, the Sharia did not come down in one go. Right? The Prophet was not given prophethood along with a big book saying this is the book, now you execute it. Right? Rather there was something called gradual revelation. Ahkam, rulings were revealed gradually. Over 24, 26 years, slowly, one by one, and there was tremendous wisdom in this. The wisdom, as Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, it's evidenced from one hadith in Bukhari, in which the Prophet, she said, that were Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to address the believers in Makkah to not drink alcohol and to not do X, Y, and Z, no one would have believed. The first ruling came down is believing in one Allah. Believe in Allah. Once the faith is strong, they understand what Allah wants from them, and they understand that He is all wise, they will understand that He has everything of our interest at heart, then He can say, okay, now you don't do this, don't do this, they will take it seriously. So it's gradual revelation. And what happens then in gradual revelation? Rules tend to amend. Rules tend to amend. Right. So what is it that I want to get at? The point I'm trying to make is, not every hadith then, not every hadith contains the final sunnah. Not every hadith contains the final sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Does this make sense? So if you come to me saying, brother, why not doing this for? It's in the hadith. Brother, it's in the hadith, it's in Sahih Bukhari, why not doing this for? Have you checked the chronology of this hadith? Do you know this hadith contains the final sunnah, or is it the previous sunnah? Easy example. The Prophet ﷺ was praying towards Baytul Maqdis. It's in Sahih Bukhari. You come to me saying, look, the Prophet ﷺ praying towards Jerusalem. Why not praying towards Jerusalem for? It's Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Hadith. What would you say? Saying, no, this is not the, what. You flick to the other chapter and you say, look, this is the other hadith. The final sunnah is in this. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. You will turn your faces towards Makkah now. It's an easy example. But can you see why then there is a danger in this? There is a danger in this. To just bring hadith, pick up a hadith book saying, here's a hadith. Why not following this for Sahih? Because it may or may not contain the final sunnah, the hadith that you're going to bring.
So it's on that topic, is there we have Asbab al-Nuzul in the Quran, and when the occasions of revelation came, did the scholars also record at a time when hadith were...
Yes, good question. So there is a genre of literature called Asbab Wurud al-Hadith. Wurud al-Hadith, that's the term they use. And it's not there's lots of work that can be done on it. And part of it is because, as you know, the hadith has variant transmissions. Some hadiths are narrated in full, other people tend to take out or extract what is needed from it. But if you are able to corroborate all the various transmissions of a hadith, you can find that sabab al-wurud. You can find out there's always a context, there's a story behind how the hadith came along, and I will point them out when we do the 40 hadith. I'll give you the context behind how the Prophet ﷺ came to use hadith, or how the companions used it. Right? So we look at what's called the utility. What's the utility of this hadith? What's the context in which it was cited? Okay, let's quickly just make some progress. Right. So number one, not every hadith is the sunnah. Are we clear with this? Right? Why is it not the sunnah? We've said hadith is to capture a statement or something that was being done in the Prophet's time. This much we know. But is it the final sunnah? This is what we will consider binding. Number two, this is an interesting one. Right? So we have said sunnah is practice, and we've said that writing is a form of preserving it. So the question is, has every sunnah been documented via this means of preservation?
No.
Yes or no? What do we think? This is the question. Right? So we're saying sunnah is practice, and we're saying hadith is a written record of it. The question is, has every sunnah been recorded in writing, or are there sunnah that are missing? That's the question.
I was actually going to ask that question.
Ah.
I was going to ask, if there was no hadith, for argument's sake, would we still be following sunnah? Because obviously it's something which has been transferred generation to generation. So, I think not every sunnah will be documented.
Okay, so the question is, when was all the sunnah documented? These are some important questions, right? We don't take these lightly. We will say by and large, 98% of the sunnah was recorded by the time of the junior companions and the tabi'in. I'll come to this, right? And we will look at this in more detail, inshallah. If you allow me to just open up this topic more, the more we look into this, the more it becomes clear to you as to how this came about, right? And in terms of transmission, just hadith. In terms of hadith transmission, this came to an end this came to a termination at the end of the 4th or 5th century. So this I said, he said, what we call the isnad. The isnad system came to an end around the 4th, 5th century. So there's a scholar by the name of Imam al-Bayhaqi. Imam al-Bayhaqi said that in my time, if anyone claims to have a hadith which has not been written, which has not been preserved in written documentation, it's a fabrication, it's a lie. All the hadiths that were in circulation from heart to heart orally have now been preserved and documented. We will look at this in more detail if you allow me, please. Right? So 98% I am saying has been documented. There is like 2%. So for example, the Malikiya, if you know the people who follow Imam Malik, they are adamant that there is one sunnah that has been missed. So it's written, but in the language of a tabi'i. We know tabi'i, follower of someone who's seen a companion, not seen the Prophet ﷺ, like this. And that's the issue of sadl. So if you've seen the Malikiya when they stand in prayer, how do they stand? Do they fold their arms? They don't fold their arms. That's called sadlul yadayn. So they say that the sadlul yadayn, if you look in the books, you will see that there's no hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, but there are hadith from companions and those underneath them. So that's potentially one sunnah that has not been recorded by the hadith, but otherwise, by and large, it's been recorded, at least by the second generation, and definitely not any more than the third generation. Right? Per the hadith, خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم. You will heard this, the best generation is mine, then those thereafter, like that. So definitely not by the third. After the third, no. But maybe there are one or two cases that have slipped from the Prophet's time and have been discussed at the time of the companions. Okay. The last point I think is important, that hadith and sunnah become synonymous post Imam Shafi'i. Right? Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, was born in 150. He's a 2nd century scholar. He starts to use the hadith and sunnah synonymously because, as I was mentioning, it's been recorded documentation. And he argued that instead of us arguing based on amal, we said amal, that we are doing this, we saw forefathers on it, he's saying we need to codify. Codification makes it easier to debate. Otherwise everyone's saying my father doing this, my father doing this, my father doing this. We're going to have what? Debates around this. Okay?
Just a quick question.
Yes.
At a very high level,
Fadal.
before we go deep into the topic, one of the criticism around hadith is that, because there are different, obviously, books or collections of hadith, and some people believe in some of the ravis, others don't. Because of this, there are various sects. So, why did, if hadith were to be important, why did the Prophet ﷺ not document or make someone document
Hold that question. Hold that question. It's going to be addressed. Yeah, because if I start addressing it, then I'm just going through the slides. So that question is going to come as well. You're asking this. This is a good question because that's the question that should come naturally to you.
Yeah.
Since I'm following this sequence, I'm prompting these questions. I'm poking you. I'm provoking you guys to bring these questions, and they're going to be answered. Right? Are we clear with this? So in Shafi'i's time, rahimahullah, he starts to use the Sunnah and Hadith synonymously. From his time onwards, we start to see this becomes more and more customary till the time of now. So we say it's in the Sunnah is this, in the Hadith is this, and we both mean the same thing. Same thing. Right. So 3 methods of preservation. I think we've talked about this. So the first one is memory. You saw the Prophet ﷺ doing this. Right. The second one is practice. The Prophet said do it, so you're doing it. Prophet ﷺ said pray as you see me pray. Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ was there as a teacher, but not just to give instructions, but to show them practically how to do it. How to do it. So wudu wasn't this like, when you go to IKEA and they give you this like list of how to build something, right? No, the Prophet showed them. He demonstrated through practice, this is how you do it. This is how I am you do it. Right? So Dabt Sadr, memory, you've seen the Prophet doing something, so you remember this. This is a form of preservation, and then you're going to relate to others. Amal, and the third one is writing. You committed to writing. Committed to writing. Right? So look, think about this. If you saw a very important person, or let's put it this way, if you have an elder in the family, so you grew up with your grandfather, for example, right? And your grandfather passes away when you're about 30 years old, right? When would you start writing about him? Here's a question. When would you want to start writing about your grandfather? Not when the memories are fresh, right? Not when he's alive, because you're still interacting with him. Usually what tends to happen is people start to write diaries or biographies of important people within the family when they realize that he's passed away, or they are now wanting to share this with the generations to come. Excuse me. Share it with generations to come. So what we'll see this, inshallah, we're going to finish it very soon. Right? What you'll see is that the people who really wrote down the hadiths and whom were responsible for its preservation and then transmission were junior companions, junior ones. We will see this in more detail. The elder ones, why not? Because they're busy with the business of state, the affairs of state. They are khulafa, they are mujahideen, they've got other things to do. But you'll see that the junior ones, especially those that are working as secretaries under the khulafa, right? Or people who are working as judges under a khilafah, and those who are what we call the dabir in the olden days, you're supposed to keep records, X, Y, and Z. These are people that are very important in the preservation of these documents. Okay? Yeah. Can we allow 5 minutes? We'll wrap up in 5 minutes. Right. So here. So we've said methods of preservation. Retention means memory. So you retain it through memory. You saw it, practice. Writing was of two types. There are informal pieces of writing. There are formal pieces of writing. Formal pieces of writing and formal pieces of writing. Yeah. Formal pieces of writing. Here, look. Thing is, we need to end, but I'll 10 minutes, okay. So look, there's this notion, there's an assumption that the Arabs were unlettered people. No doubt. The Quran says this, they were ummiyin. But did this mean none of them wrote? Did this mean none of them wrote? They were inept, they were unable to write? If that is the case, if we are saying that the Arabs did not know how to write and they did not write, the longest surah in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, and the longest verse. So the longest verse in the Quran is in the longest surah of the Quran. Yeah. Surah Al-Baqarah is the longest surah of the Quran, surah number 2, and within it is the longest ayah of the Quran, which says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, idha tadayantum bidaynin faktubu. That all you who believe, if you were to have a loan, if you were to take a loan from someone, dayn in Arabic means to take a loan. If you were to take a loan from someone, write it down. Faktubu. Faktubu. Legally speaking, this is not possible. If the Arabs don't know how to write, for Allah to command them to write is to command them something they can't do. This in legal talk is taklifu ma la yutaq. To burden with someone with something they can't do. If somebody doesn't have any arms and you tell him to make wuzu, you wash your arms, how's he going to wash his arms? It's not possible. So what I'm arguing here is, if the Arabs did not know how to write, why are they being told to write down their transactions then? This is an impossibility. So the Quran itself is telling you what? That yes, there are unlettered people, but amongst them there are people who can write. وَلْيَكْتُبْ كَاتِبٌ بَيْنَهُمْ بِالْعَدْلِ. Katib, somebody who scribes. The scribe needs to write down in fairness, make sure that he writes the details down so there's no disputes at a later stage regarding the loan. So you know what happens? Someone takes the loan and then they agree on a date. Right? In the subcontinent, what happens? The one who's giving the loan will want to take it back as soon as possible, and the one who's taken the money won't want to give it back until as late as possible. This will happen. So you need to agree on the transaction properly of when you want to give it back, when you don't want to give it back. So this, what do you think? Is this a formal piece of writing or an informal piece of writing? Look, this is a formal piece of writing. Another example, we've all read the Seerah. Have we read about the boycott? What happened in the boycott in Makkah? Do you remember the boycott? Shi'b Abi Talib. The boycott that the Quraysh decided to boycott the Prophet's family and his tribe. That boycott was written down. It was a written form. It was a written document that was then put in the Kaaba. Do you remember this? It's in the Seerah. It was a written document which was then placed in the Kaaba. And then by the end of the boycott, what had happened? The ants had eaten the document itself. Where did writing come from? I'm asking you, where did writing come from? Did writing not exist? You see, so some writing was taking place. See, this is key understanding. You need to understand this, that okay, writing was taking place amongst Arabs. Pre-Islamically, in the pre-Islamic period, there's a tradition amongst the Arab historians that have mentioned that amongst the Arabs, they would class someone who could do three things as al-kamil. Al-kamil means a perfect person. Or nowadays, an insan al-kamil is a Superman. If you know Nietzsche and his philosophy of what a Superman is. So it's a term that is used by the Sufi as well. Al-insan al-kamil, the perfect being. So the Arabs in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and prior to the Prophet ﷺ used to consider a person who could read and write and who was good at two things. Who was good at swimming and someone who was good at archery was called an insan al-kamil. He's a proper man. He's a complete person. He's a perfect person. What were the three things? Someone who was good at reading and writing, someone who could swim, and someone who was good at archery was considered al-kamil. And they give names. They give names of who the Kamala or the Kamilin were in the Jahili period, just before the Prophet ﷺ. To the extent that Al-Baladhuri mentions 19 names. He says that when Islam came, there were 19 people who could read and write. And I'm telling you, based on that narration itself, there's more, because he doesn't mention Abu Bakr. Who remembers the conversion of Umar ibn Khattab? This reminds me. Umar ibn Khattab, how does he convert? The famous story, he's out there, he hears about the Prophet ﷺ, he's going to kill him, he's decided that's it, I'm going to go and murder him, and then on his way, he meets someone, he asks him, where are you going? He says, I'm going to murder the Prophet ﷺ, creating too much mischief. And then what does the person say to him? You need to go to your sister's house, sort your own family out. He goes to his sister's house, what are they doing? How can they read? They were enlightened people. Did they have the Quran with them? Yeah, they had verses of Surah Taha. Remember what happens? He breaks the door, he goes in, and then he beats them up, and then eventually he calms down, and then he says, okay, bring me the Quran, let me see it. And then they say, no, you need to wash yourself, you need to shower, you can't touch it. So then because he's sincere, how is he reading? I'm asking, how is he reading if he can't read? Genuinely, there's some questions we need to ask ourselves. Right? So this is important. I'll stop here, inshallah. So what have we said? We have said that let's have a look. right here. Here's just a quick snapshot, if you would like, of various forms of pre-Islamic writing. So in the Jahili period, before the Prophet ﷺ came, yes, I'm arguing that not everyone was literate. Yeah? And by literate, what do we mean? Let's be very clear what we mean by literate. They did not know how to read and write. That does not mean that they are what? Ignorant people. Right? So there's a famous scholar by the name of Muhammad Asad, if you've heard of him, from the last generation, who was a Jew who converted to Islam and then spent many years in Saudi Arabia, living in the deserts in the Najd. Right? He's an interesting figure because he was very close to King Abdul Aziz Al Saud, the founder of the modern day Saudi state. He then leaves and becomes the first foreign minister to Pakistan. He's also wrote part of the Pakistan constitution. He's an interesting figure. Muhammad Asad has this observation regarding Bedouins during his time in the Najd. He says that yes, these people cannot read, but the fact that these individuals who cannot read books can quote Aristotle to me, can quote Plato to me, can hold a conversation about the Greeks and then what about Islam, maybe we want to consider what we mean by Arabs being illiterate. Yeah, you go to the villages in Hindustan, Pakistan, people might not read, but the intelligent people, they've heard things from the elders and they can relate things to you and they can live life. It's not like they can't function at all. Yeah, so we might want to ask this question about this. But in any case, what I'm saying is we still have documents. There are forms of pre-Islamic writing. What are they? The first one, as you see above, are commercial contracts, debts, poetry. So something which you may or may not be aware of is that the Arabs used to pride in their language. Very much they used to pride in their language. And they used to have something called the souk, which are the bazaars, right? The carnivals. And they used to have a carnival going all across the Arab world. If you want, maybe I will show you all the different dots where they used to have carnivals. And these are the carnivals which they used to sell stuff. So the Arab peoples, what was their source of income? If you're in the desert, what's your source of income?
Dates.
Are you gonna have Microsoft gonna employ you? What do you think? How do they earn a living? You're saying dates, but in a desert, how am I gonna grow dates? Dates will only grow where there's agricultural land, where you have fertile land, and the vast majority of it is not agricultural land. Yeah, you have some oasis, you have the odd oasis here and there. So how did they earn a living?
Guides.
Guides to what?
Wasn't it didn't they rely on people to come and see the idols and stuff like that?
Hajj once a year. Hajj is once a year.
No.
And there's 4 months, Ashurul Hurum, that's it. What are they doing for the rest of the year? Do you think that was enough to keep them going? No, it's there. Right? Someone said trade, which is correct. The Quran, لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. They would have a trip to the north and the south, what was referred to as the trip of Shita and Saif. Shita means winter and Saif means summer. So if you've seen the Arabian Peninsula, what would happen is these were basically a transport system. They would take goods from what is now Bahrain and Khuzestan in Iran and the UAE. So these are goods coming from India, China, and then they would go along Oman, along the coast, Yemen, up from Yemen all the way up to past Hijaz, up to Tabuk, which is now Damascus. So they are exporting goods from Persian Empire and onwards to Byzantium, which is the west, and vice versa, bringing goods from there and going around. That's all they're doing. Business, trade, right? This is if you're like Quraysh, if you have a pass, because Quraysh had a pass to go through every tribe because they're the people of the Kaaba and they can go past. Otherwise, every tribe is saying, you need to pay me toll, give me money. You're not allowed to come over here. You need to pay me money. You see, this is how it would work, right? So this is a legitimate income. The other form of income, which is, I believe, more common if you've read the Jahili poetry, is robbing one another. They used to raid one another. If he's got money, I'm going to fight him, take his camels, take this, and they fought for years and years. This is how they earn money, right? So in every carnival, in every souk, what would they have? It's not just buying, selling, and goods. So the famous souk, the souk that we always talk about, which is the biggest one, was the one in Hajj. And it's outside of the Haram now, in a place called, just before Ta'if, where the miqat is for the people of Najd. It's called Qarn al-Manazil, if I'm not mistaken. There's a place there, even today, it's called Suq Uqad. Suq Uqad. Suq, I mean, is a bazaar, and Uqad was the name of the place. So all the people would get together, and in these carnivals, they would have poetry contests. You know, activities going on, people playing and gambling and this and that. They used to have poetry contests. The one who would win the poetry contest, and the Arabs would say this is the superior one, they would hang it on the Kaaba. So prior to Islam, we have what's referred to as the Mu'allaqatu Sabah, or the 7 hanging odes. Right? Think of like your, I don't know, your pop charts or whatever you want to call them. And these were the 7 hanging odes that stood the test of time. For 150 years, and even more ancient than that, were these eloquent odes which they hung on the Kaaba, and they said, anyone can beat this, we will put ears on as well. And the Prophet ﷺ said regarding the first one, which was considered the most eloquent one, he said, Al-Maliku Dhillil. Malik means king, and Dhillil means the misleading one. So the Prophet ﷺ acknowledged that Imra'ul Qais was an eloquent being, although he was very misled in what he said, but language-wise, definitely is the case, because the Quran uses the expressions. Think about this, the Quran, which is the word of God, the most eloquent, is borrowing Imra'ul Qais' expressions, or at least his expressions are being acknowledged in his structure. So this is something it definitely is. So poetry, as we can see, tribal agreements, tribes, even the Prophet ﷺ had these, with these tribes, the constitution of Medina, X, Y, and Z. Genealogies, nasab, did the Arabs always pride in their nasab? I am from Quraysh, I am from Banu Hudayl, I am from this, I am from this. And their poetry, they used to this one another all the time, Haja. And they used to pride in their aphorisms, literature we will talk about at another stage. So this is pre-Islamic faith. The soothsayers used to have a certain way of speaking. They would speak in a certain way, and that's what we mean by literature. Aphorisms were the speeches that they used to give. So when we talk about poetry in the souks, they used to give speeches as well. The Arabs are people of language, so they used to give fiery speeches. Some of these are recorded, others are not. Also aphorisms or sayings, lots of sayings. Most people have these, so they had sayings as well that have been recorded. Personal correspondence, especially if you're a tribe leader. If you're a tribal leader, you can't leave your tribe, you can't leave your flock and go elsewhere. So you're going to send someone with a letter, take it over there, take it over there, like this. Right? I think we'll stop at this. If you have any questions, then please, you may fire away. I think this is enough for the time being. So what we've established then, to summarize, we've understood what hadith means, we've understood what sunnah means, we have a better understanding of it. Then we looked at writing, or forms of preservation. How is the sunnah preserved? How is the hadith preserved? And we started this by looking at pre-Islamic models of preservation. Yeah, we talk about Islam later on. So we want to see what was the situation of what Arabia before the Prophet ﷺ came. So if the Arabs had a notion of writing before the Prophet ﷺ came, then yes, the Prophet would also write. But then we look at what changes this brings along. There are changes, significant changes. Yeah, it reminds me of another incident. There's lots of incidents in the Sirah. Waraq ibn Nawfal. When the Prophet ﷺ was given messengership, remember Khadija, his wife, she believed in him and she took him to her cousin, Waraq ibn Nawfal, who was a Christian, and he also had the book. He had the Torah and Injil in front of him. And there's a story there, but what we're seeing is writing was there. Right? So I think it's important to clarify this misconception. So we'll look at this inshallah in more detail. Okay. Any questions, Father, please?
You know, sir, in this point here, you've kind of emphasized that there was writing and there were people that could write. Is that because there are assertions that or the reason you're emphasizing, is that because there are assertions that it wasn't the case? Or?
Yes. It's because, one, it wasn't the case, or that didn't exist. It's a lay assumption. And that's because we really want to look at what they wrote, how they wrote, and also it's logical. If the pre-Islamic folks wrote, then why won't Muslims write? When there's an even bigger what's what I'm looking for? Incentive, even bigger incentive to write. So why wouldn't they write? And naturally, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to answer your question next lesson. The brother who asked that question regarding did the companions write or not, that will be answered in the next lesson. So you may have to come in and look at what the companions wrote, how they wrote. But in short, what I would say is, you know, at least this much you inshallah won't be too difficult to fathom, right? The Prophet ﷺ wrote to different tribes, correct or not correct? The Prophet ﷺ himself wrote to different tribes. He had political alliances. He wrote to different tribes. He wrote to, especially near the end of his life, he wrote to the empires. He wrote to Muqawqas in Egypt. He wrote to Najashi. He wrote to Kisra. He wrote to Qaisar. So there's a scholar by the name of Professor Hamidullah, who's passed away, rahimahullah. He gathered all the political documents of the Prophet ﷺ, and he gathered up to 400 odd political documentations that we have from the Prophet's time. Yeah, or Dr. Mustafa A'adami, he looked at the Prophet's scribes, people who wrote on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ, and there's about 90 of them. Not all the time, but at given times, 90 scribes, that's a good enough amount that a leader would need to have. Okay, so writing is there, inshallah. So next lesson we will look at what forms of writing took place in the time of the companions and the generations after and then those after. We'll link it to Sahih Bukhari, because after that I think it's clear, nobody asks after that. But there's a gap between Sahih Bukhari and the Prophet ﷺ that needs to be bridged, and I'll bridge it for you, inshallah.
Just a quick announcement. So apologies on my part for the handouts. Started prepared handouts for all of you. Inshallah, we'll have the printing ready for you next week. Inshallah. So